Laura Kempton was a 23-year-old resident of Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 1981. She attended the Portsmouth Beauty School and also worked at the Macro Polo gift store and Karen's ice cream parlor. Laura had a large personality, was well known for being gregarious, and was an exuberant free spirit. Laura was last saw alone during the early hours of September 28, 1981, as she entered her flat on Chapel Street. A couple of hours later, Laura's body was discovered by a police officer who was trying to serve a court summons for outstanding parking charges. As the officer approached the house, he spotted a missing wooden panel piece on the front door. He could see Laura's body lying on the floor not far inside the apartment via this little aperture. According to an autopsy, she was killed not long after moving into her apartment. Her left side of the skull sustained severe injuries. Laura had sustained many fractures to her skull in addition to brain lacerations and contusions. Additionally, she had also been assaulted, which meant DNA of the perpetrator could be collected from her body. Other pieces of evidence were gathered by the investigators from the crime scene and kept for future use. They spoke with other tenants in Laura's apartment building, but they were unable to obtain any pertinent information. Sadly, the case was abandoned. Investigators disclosed in 1986 that they had questioned Ronald Spiewak regarding Laura's murder. 2 more women were murdered by him in Boston, Massachusetts. Although Spiewak said he had no connection, the Portsmouth police were allegedly keeping an eye on him. Upon closer examination of the offenses for which he was accused, the only obvious connection is that Ronald Spiewak was born and raised in a New Hampshire city, approximately 45 minutes away from Portsmouth. This is hardly an evidence of a crime. Spiewak had picked up his victims, Gina Cornier and Kathleen McGuire, on 2 separate occasions in Boston. Even though he eventually confessed to taking their lives, Spiewak maintained that each of them had pulled a knife on him while demanding more money for their services during the 2 incidents. He insisted that his actions were solely defensive. Once Spiewak had both women strangled, he discarded their bodies somewhere else. Gina is in a deserted railway car in South Boston, while Kathleen is in the Kittery, Maine driveway of a tourist center located on Interstate 95. Nothing substantial was ever found to link to Laura's case. 2 detectives from Portsmouth who were attending a conference in Florida in 1998 listened carefully as a Navy Investigative Service investigator presented the case of Dina Kiechler, which remained unsolved. In December 1990, Dina was attacked and strangled with a rope in her Mayport, Florida home. There were clumps of Dina's long dark hair, much of which had been chopped off in the bathtub, and signs of a fierce struggle everywhere throughout the house. When the crime was committed, Dina's husband, a Navy officer, was away on deployment. Captain James Tucker of the Portsmouth Police Department was astounded by what he was hearing. It was shocking how much Dina's case resembled the murder of Michelle Lafond, a woman from New Hampshire. Even better, a man named John Brewer had previously been taken into custody by the authorities in relation to Dina's case. Unfortunately, the authorities had freed him from detention soon after his arrest because they could not find enough tangible proof. But soon after, John Brewer was taken back into custody in connection with Michelle Lafond's case in Dublin, New Hampshire. Investigators in Portsmouth were able to establish a clear connection between Michelle Lafond and Brewer. James Tucker discovered a job application filled out by John Brewer that used Michelle's husband Gary as a reference while going through documents. Police compared DNA from a sample of hairs from the Kiechler case to DNA from a sample from the Lafond case. John Brewer was accused and given an arraignment in relation to both cases. Accompanying the indictment, Brewer's involvement in 3 additional cases, 2 in Portsmouth and 1 in Florida, was publicized, sending shockwaves across the Granite State. It seems that Brewer was residing in New Hampshire when Laura Kempton passed away. However, his approach proved to be noticeably different. They never really found any correlations. Maybe it was merely a snap judgment, because the cops who had successfully prosecuted Brewer were from Portsmouth. There were other tales circulating in the small hamlet by the sea that blamed Laura's death on 2 young guys who were well known for being aggressive drug dealers in the area. Members of the operation headed by Portsmouth resident Thomas Faraghi had previously gone through the police logs with more minor transgressions, but they had risen to considerably more intemperate crimes. Particularly, Faraghi had been detained for abusing multiple females. In the end, he was charged in March 1982 with the murder of Valerie Blair, a 24-year-old, in the nearby town of Rye. Blair was discovered in State Park after being shot 5 times in the head and face with a 22mm pistol. Despite spending decades behind bars, Thomas Faraghi continued to insist on his innocence. He said that one of his friends must have stolen his gun, and he held them responsible for Valerie Blair's tragedy. Faraghi stated in an interview that he thought Laura Kempton's life was taken by the same perpetrator. According to Faraghi, his companion got irritated when he witnessed Laura, a customer of theirs, kissing someone in her room while they were there doing business. It's interesting to note that Laura Kempton and Faraghi's girlfriend were both enrolled in the Portsmouth Beauty School in 1982. Although Faraghi's DNA was gathered, no further charges were brought against him. Police investigated and cleared the man Thomas Faraghi accused of being behind Laura's case. On July 20, 2023, there was a significant update. At that point, investigators declared that after 42 years, Laura's case had been resolved. Ronnie James Lee, who was 21 at the time, was the individual who was found to be culpable by investigators. According to officials, Lee worked and resided in Portsmouth. According to Assistant Attorney General Rachel Harrington, there is no proof that he was familiar with Laura Kempton. Lee was a member of the U.S. Army from May 15, 1981 until June 8, 1982, when he began working for MBI Security at Liberty Mutual in Portsmouth. In November of 1982, Lee was charged with theft attempt and was taken into custody by Portsmouth police at his mother's residence on Rock Hill Avenue. Lee's criminal history includes being linked to 4 residential burglaries and 1 commercial burglary in 1983, including 2 burglaries he pleaded guilty to. Lee was found guilty in 1987 of charges relating to a burglary that occurred in Keene, New Hampshire, and involved the assault of a woman inside the residence. After receiving a prison sentence, he was housed there from December 1987 until July 1990. On February 9, 2005, Lee, then 45 years old, overdosed and died. Attorney General's office officials stated that if Lee was to be alive, he would be charged in the first degree for intentionally taking Laura's life while committing or attempting to commit aggravated felonious assault, or for hitting her with a blunt object, possibly a wine bottle. Lee's identity was established by the investigators using genetic genealogy procedures. They added that physical evidence taken from the site in 1981 turned up a male DNA profile decades later through forensic examination. According to officials, starting in 2022, Portsmouth police conducted forensic genetic genealogy in order to identify Lee as the contributor of the DNA found at the crime scene. They did this in collaboration with the forensic laboratories of the New Hampshire State Police, the Maine State Police, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, and Identifiers International. Lee has passed away. Thus, the case is deemed closed and resolved. The announcement regarding the case's resolution was made public by Laura's family. The Kempton family would like to thank the Portsmouth Police Department from the bottom of their hearts for their assistance in solving Laura's case. This moment for Laura is the result of their decades-long effort, determination, and incredible personal commitment. The family would like to thank the Investigative Division of the Portsmouth Police Department, retired Captain John Parachi, and all of his team members, past and present, for their diligent efforts on Laura's case. This significant moment has come about due to their incredible efforts. Over the course of the last 41 years, many hands have touched Laura's file, and the family is sincerely grateful to everyone who made a contribution. As we analyze this information, the Kempton family would like to request privacy at this time. I'm grateful to everyone. Law enforcement officials have previously stated that there may have been a connection between Tammy Little's 1982 death in Portsmouth and Laura's case. Attorney General John Formella responded that Tammy's case is still being looked into when questioned about it. Formella stated that the small case is still being investigated. We are hoping that the announcement we are making today will provide us with some further details regarding that matter. It was Tuesday, October 19th, 1982. 2 days had passed since Tammy had last spoken to anyone. The 20-year-old student at Portsmouth Beauty School was last seen by pals on a Saturday night when they dropped her off at her house. Even though the outgoing young lady lived alone, she would never purposefully isolate herself for so long. There was obviously something awry when she had not returned. Tammy's mother had good reason to be worried. She made the decision to see her daughter at her apartment on Maplewood Avenue. She was severely scarred by what she experienced on that October day in 1982. She had been severely battered, and there was a dead child in her house. Tammy's mother called the authorities, who quickly arrived at 315 Maplewood Avenue to take care of the situation. Investigators spoke with neighbors who lived close by and gathered tangible evidence from the house. The next day, an autopsy was conducted, and it was discovered that Tammy had been ferociously beaten to death, resulting in severe brain injuries. In the days and months to come, Tammy's friends and family will be grieving her profound loss. The rest of the city was left in a state of acute anxiety. There was a sense of unease in the town, as if the concerns of many residents had been validated. Another girl, another crime, and no arrest had happened. Although there are obvious parallels between Tammy's and Laura's instances, there is much more that the two ladies have in common than just how their lives ended. Tammy and Laura both went to the Portsmouth Beauty School and lived alone in ground-floor apartments in Portsmouth. They had been aspiring models getting their pictures taken in the hopes of landing a job. The two gregarious ladies who went to several of the same clubs in the downtown area passed away early on a fall weekend day. The distance between them is only 1 mile. It is hoped that DNA testing will soon determine whether Tammy Littles was also killed by Ronnie James Lee. A construction worker in Nockamixon Township discovered Richard Wheeler's remains in a wooden property more than 40 years ago. It took prosecutors 43 years to locate Wheeler's killer. They finally succeeded in April of 2023. Investigators from the Pennsylvania State Police, the Bucks County District Attorney's Office, and other law enforcement agencies have identified the individual who fatally shot 34-year-old Richard Wesley Wheeler in Nockamixon Township in September 1980. After escaping from law enforcement, Peter Eric Marshner, who later changed his name, shot Wheeler 4 times and then hid his body in the forested area off of Hill Road, about a mile south of the intersection with Kintner Hill Road in Nockamixon Township. September 18, 1980, was the day that Wheeler's body was found. After a thorough investigation conducted by Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Christopher Cleveland and Bucks County Detective David Hanks, it was concluded that Marshner had killed Wheeler on Leslie Schmidt's orders. Schmidt believed Wheeler had mismanaged a substantial amount of money that he had given Wheeler responsibility for managing. Since then, Marshner and Schmidt have both passed away, Marshner in 2006 and Schmidt in 2022. Given that everyone involved in the murder has died, the Bucks County District Attorney's Office views this case as solved. The victim's family was consulted as well, and they expressed gratitude that the murder has been solved. This amazing investigative effort created a timeline of events that led to the resolution of this unsolved cold case. When the gunman was located earlier this year, investigators were able to solve the last piece of this puzzle. According to the investigation, the 3 individuals, Wheeler, Marshner, and Schmidt, met in Danbury, Connecticut's federal prison. Marshner, a German national referred to as the Captain, had a track record of theft of cash, boats, and boating supplies from Caribbean island ports. In May 1974, Marschner received a 2-year prison sentence for stealing a 41-foot sailboat in Martinique. He was meant to be sent to Germany after being freed from prison, but he managed to return to the Caribbean islands by working as a crew member on a private yacht. In February 1977, while the yacht was in St. Lucia, the owners spent the night ashore. By the following morning, the motorized dinghy, $10,000 worth of boating gear, and all of the money were missing along with Marschner. 2 weeks later, at St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, Marschner pilfered a 43-foot sailboat from a harbor. Following a prolonged manhunt, French authorities detained Marschner in May 1977. After entering a guilty plea to grand theft and interstate transit of stolen goods, Marschner was sent to Danbury Federal Prison. It was there that he met Schmidt, a methamphetamine dealer from Bucks County, and Wheeler, a marijuana dealer who had escaped to California. The three men planned to establish a methamphetamine lab in Upper Bucks County after their release from jail while they were incarcerated. In November 1979, Wheeler became the first to be released. Schmidt was granted a 30-day leave of absence later that year. Schmidt introduced Wheeler to a friend who leased Wheeler the Nockamexon Township property while he was out of prison. In addition, Schmidt gave Wheeler $250,000 to support Schmidt's family as he completed the remaining portion of his sentence. After being released from jail in July 1980, U.S. immigration officials brought Marschner to JFK Airport in New York City so he could be returned to Germany. In the chaos that followed the cancellation of his deportation flight because of technical problems, Marschner was able to escape and leave the airport. Wheeler moved into a camper on the Nockamexon Township grounds and started working for the methamphetamine lab there. Despite being incarcerated, Schmidt was providing funding for the narcotics enterprise. In Bucks County, Marschner got back in touch with Wheeler and started serving as his personal driver and bodyguard. Schmidt and Wheeler fell out over their business endeavor at some point. Schmidt thought Wheeler was mismanaging the $250,000 that Schmidt had given him, taking personal use of the money rather than allocating it to Schmidt's family. According to the investigation's findings, Schmidt gave Marschner the order to assassinate Wheeler because of that belief. Sometime between September 8 and September 18, 1980, Wheeler was shot 4 times. Following the murder, 42-year-old Marschner escaped to New Jersey in Wheeler's pickup vehicle. Investigators interviewed witnesses in 1983 and came to the conclusion that Schmidt had employed a German man to pull the trigger. Investigators also discovered that Schmidt had met the gunman at Danbury Federal Prison. Investigators have searched for Marschner, who vanished after killing Wheeler during the course of the case. When detectives looked into Marschner's criminal past earlier this year, they found that he had been detained in New York in 1982 on suspicion of narcotics conspiracy after impersonating as Charles McLaren. The fingerprints taken during McLaren's 1982 arrest and Marschner's 1997 arrest were identical. According to the investigation, Marschner had been going as Charles McLaren, using a different name, birth date, and social security number. He returned to New Jersey, got married, had kids, and operated a prosperous limousine service in New York City until passing away in 2006 after being freed on a drug conspiracy charge. 29 years old Teresa Scalf, a compassionate nurse, was employed at Lakeland Regional Health in Florida in 1986. She cherished being of service to others and raising her 8-year-old son, Jason. As a single mother living by herself in a tiny apartment, Jason was her sole family. Teresa had brown hair, green eyes, and a perpetual smile on her face. She was a happy, outgoing girl who made many of acquaintances both in her neighborhood and at work. She loved to watch movies, read books, and spend time with her son. She enjoyed learning new things and traveling as well. One day, she hoped to become a doctor and help save more lives. One evening, on October 15, 1986, Teresa was by herself in her apartment. Meanwhile, Jason was spending the night with his grandmother Betty. It was a dark and stormy night, and the rain was pouring down. An unidentified male broke into her house. He intended to hurt Teresa, and he carried a knife. His prints could be seen on the windowsill and doorknob. In addition, he had dropped a cigarette butt on the floor and left his DNA on it. He tried to push himself on Teresa and attacked her with his knife. Teresa used every ounce of strength to fight back. She attempted to defend herself with her hands, but he seriously hurt them. Since he was stronger than her, he severely injured her throat. Subsequently, her life was taken by him, and her body was dumped on the ground. He left the apartment in haste. When Teresa failed to arrive at work the following morning, her mother Betty became worried and went to check on her. She discovered a bloody puddle in Teresa's body. She contacted the cops, and they arrived at the residence. From the crime scene, they gathered every piece of evidence and preserved it for later use. Although several individuals were questioned and leads were pursued, the case was never solved, and the culprit remained unidentified. At last, Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd declared the case solved on October 16, 2023. They were able to establish that Teresa's injuries were caused by Donald Douglas. Douglas committed the act when he was 33 years old. Along with his brother, he co-owned an electrical company. Douglas was 54 years old when he died of natural causes. Douglas had no prior criminal history and was cremated upon his death, which made it more challenging to link him to the case. At a press conference, Teresa's mother Betty Scalf and two of her sisters joined Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd as he detailed how his department resolved the 37-year-old case. Douglas lived right behind the duplex, according to Sheriff Judd, and while detectives interviewed him and other neighbors at the time, they never thought of him as a suspect. According to Judd, Douglas had no visible wounds, and there was no reason for the initial detectives looking into the matter to suspect him. Judd concluded that Douglas killed Teresa because he wanted an affair with her, but she turned him down. According to Judd, the agency entered DNA from the crime site into the FBI's national database in the early 2000s, but due to technological advancements, no matches were identified, indicating that the perpetrator's DNA had not been entered. Judd gave Detective Matthew Newbold credit for spearheading the case's resolution when he was given it in 2015. Working with Othram, a Texas company that specializes in developing genetic samples from crime scene evidence, Newbold kept a photo of Teresa Scalf on his desk and vowed to her family that he would not retire until he had identified the perpetrator. Othram uses publicly available DNA that people submit through programs like 23andMe. The company assisted in constructing the suspect's family tree. A hit landed on Douglas's third cousin, who had conceived a child in 1949 without being married. In the end, what Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd called the unlawful affair turned out to be a new branch in the family tree. According to David Nutting, an official from Othram, it was the 106th publicly disclosed resolution of an unresolved case using Othram DNA research. According to him, there are an estimated 330,000 unresolved cases in the U.S. When detectives from the sheriff's office determined that Douglas was the culprit, they got in touch with his son and requested a DNA sample. He willingly complied, according to Judd, and was mortified to hear that his sample confirmed the presence of Donald Douglas blood at the crime scene. Teresa's sister, Pam Shade, stated, "To start, let me say that Teresa was a wonderful, loving person who did not deserve it." She continued, "Our family did not deserve this." As a nursing assistant, she began her career at the bottom. She attended a respiratory program. She was ecstatic to receive her RN. "Never have I seen someone so proud. I did it, Pam," she said. "Yes, I did." And following this talk, a month later she passed away. Now that we know who did this, maybe it brings consolation to everyone. In addition, I want to encourage other victims. Do not give up. Law enforcement do not give up. You also do not give up as long as they don't. Teresa's other sister, Lynn Scarf, stated that Teresa mentioned having some unpleasant experiences with a neighbor, but did not completely characterize him. I'm putting that out there as a warning to the present-day stalker victims. Teresa had informed us about a strange neighbor who had visited her home carrying what appeared to be a flower that had been plucked from the ground and placed in a pot. She had informed us about him that he was kind of stalkerish, but she never really gave a good description of him. Therefore, if someone is acting strangely toward you, especially a woman, don't just tell your sisters in general terms about it. Tell them exactly what he looks like. Betty Scalf stated as she took the mic, "All I want to say is I am 84 years old. I lived to see this through. That's probably why I lived a long life." For over 50 years, Pamela Conyers, a high school student from Maryland, had been missing from a nearby shopping center. She was later discovered dead by strangulation. On Friday, law enforcement declared that the case had been officially resolved. However, the suspect Forrest Clyde Williams III, who was identified by investigators through the use of DNA testing and genetic research, passed away in 2018 from natural reasons. There are a lot of unresolved cases for the inhabitants of this close-knitted suburban neighborhood outside of Baltimore, since officials have been connected to past unsolved homicides. At the night of Conyers' disappearance, the 16-year-old attended a high school pep rally and then drove to the mall. When she failed to return from her errands, her parents filed a missing persons report. Her body was found by officials in a forested region 4 days later, not far from the family vehicle she had been driving. At a press conference on Friday, Anne Arundel County police officials stated that there was no proof that Conyers was acquainted with her alleged murderer. Additionally, they stated that the case is still open because they haven't ruled out the potential that there was another suspect involved. Authorities from the federal and municipal levels commended detectives for their 10-year pursuit of justice in this case. FBI agent Tom Sobokinski stated, "We are happy to provide Pamela Conyers and her loved ones with a measure of justice. This demonstrates that victims are never lost in the eyes of law enforcement, even when cases become cold and detectives shift. When Conyers was killed in 1970, neither DNA analysis nor an investigative genetic genealogy procedure was available to detectives, according to Sobokinski. When investigators collected evidence from the 1970 crime scene, they had no idea how it might later be used. However, cold case investigators recently created DNA profiles that they match to data found in publicly accessible genealogical databases, according to the officer. This allowed them to find possible Williams relatives, build a family tree, and eventually identify the suspect. He refused to go into detail about the process or say which relatives pointed them in the direction of Williams. However, according to Sobokinski, the case shows how developing technology enables law enforcement to solve cold cases, a process that has brought optimism to areas where there may not have been any before. In recent years, genetic genealogy have transformed cold case investigations nationwide. Nonetheless, privacy groups have voiced concerns regarding the consequences of law enforcement gaining access to public genealogy databases. Officials from Anne Arundel County gave scant information about Williams, stating only that he was a Virginian for the majority of his life and had a limited criminal history. When Conyers was killed, he was 21. Williams attended Anne Arundel County High School when his family moved to Maryland when he was a youngster, according to officials. Later on, he relocated to Virginia again. Police displayed an old mugshot of Williams from the early 1970s and claimed that he had been arrested locally for intoxication and disorderly conduct, among other minor offenses. Online court records indicate he was issued a citation for fishing without a license in 1990, but they make no mention of that arrest. On Friday, calls to the phone numbers listed for his relatives were not immediately answered. According to his obituary, Williams left behind 2 children and a few other relatives as well. During the Friday press conference, Anne Arundel County Police Chief Amal Awad stated that he would have been charged with Pamela Conyers' murder if he had still been living. The Conyers family had desired privacy, according to officials. Conyers' high school classmate Michael Golden remarked that while the statement provided some closure, it also sparked additional doubts. Golden held his high school yearbook and opened it to a picture of Conyers when he arrived at the press conference. Regarding the suspect, he stated, "I don't know anything about this guy, so it's still frustrating. All of our classmates have been struggling with it for a long time." Conyers made friends with Golden during band practice, and he claimed to have a clear memory of the day she vanished. He remembered that Monday morning after her disappearance, when he had seen her vacant desk in trigonometry. He added, "I still grieve her passing. I got to age, while she didn't. She will always be 16. Another longtime local, David Wells, whose wife attended Conyers' school, claimed to have been in the Air Force at the time the case was being investigated. He remembered getting letters about the tragedy back home from family members when he was stationed in Hawaii. Wells expressed surprise that investigators did not think her murder was connected to other unsolved killings of young women that occurred at the same period. Officials stated that although the investigation is still ongoing, investigators do not think the Conyers case is related to the death of Catherine Ann Sensick, a Baltimore nun who vanished from a nearby mall and was subsequently discovered dead from blunt force injuries. The case was covered in the Netflix documentary The Keepers in 2017. On November 27, 1970, in Modesto, California, Susan Robin Bender was born. She was Patricia Chupko Bender's only child. Susan, who was 15 at the time, left her family's house on April 25, 1986, to spend the weekend with friends in Carmel by the sea. She strolled to the Greyhound bus stop located at the intersection of 10th Street and G Street. Susan ran into friends while she was waiting for the bus. She informed them of her coastal journey and her plan to return in a few days. After their conversation, Susan used the payphone at the depot to make a call. A full-sized olive green 1977 Ford van arrived after about 10 minutes, and Susan stepped inside. Susan was last observed at that location. She had a lot of freedom for a 15-year-old, which was not terribly uncommon in the 1980s. Susan's mother, Pat Bender, assumed that her daughter must have arrived in Carmel safely and was enjoying herself with her pals. However, she started to worry when Susan didn't make the normal phone call home. She filed a missing person report for her daughter on May 1, 1986. The detective quickly concluded that Susan had suffered a dreadful event. "We have specific information that suggests foul play was involved in Susan Bender's disappearance." An investigator informed the local newspaper. The same publication was informed by Susan's mother that although Susan had run away twice previously, she had always returned home somewhat quickly. She said that before she vanished, things had been going well between us, and that there had been no signs that she intended to flee. Pat proceeded by saying that an unidentified male individual of interest had been discovered in possession of Susan's phone book, clothing, and journal. "I am afraid that she was attacked by a man who was questioned by the police, but was never taken into custody. Despite having a lot of circumstantial evidence against him, they chose not to arrest him. Susan was never thought to be missing on her own free will," the police stated. In 1987, Detective Richard Ridenour, who worked on the case until his retirement in 2000, informed the press he believed Susan was probably dead. According to Susan's mother, during a 1999 interview, the police stated that they couldn't do much in the absence of a body. In the same year, Detective Ridenour made a statement. "Susan Bender abruptly vanished off the face of the planet. The strangest part about this case is that no information about her has surfaced in all these years, and no one has ever come forward to tell what happened to her." Two childhood friends from Linden, California, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine, were known to have targeted young ladies in and around the adjacent Stockton region in 1999. There was a conjecture that Susan might have been one of their victims. Numerous of their victims remain unidentified. Although Susan disappeared while the men were occupied with their bad actions, it is likely that the men had anything to do with her kidnapping, even though the authorities did not know. Susan's disappearance was consistent with their victim-focused strategy. However, Susan's case has never been connected to Herzog and Shermanteen's crimes despite years of investigation. In the 1980s and 1990s, they went on a rampage. They may have killed over 15 people, including several women. Susan's matter remained unresolved in the interim. Investigators spoke with friends and relatives who battled to preserve Susan's tale for almost 40 years. Susan's buddy, Sandy Silveria, made a comment in 2021. Where is she? What happened to her? Whoever did this needs to answer for their actions. The Modesto Police Department declared in October 2021 that they have reopened the case in an effort to find the long-lost adolescent. In the statement, the agency stated, "After reviewing this case, we found some potential areas of opportunity that could help advance this case. This encompasses the application of technological innovations. We also think that there might be unidentified people who may have important knowledge about Susan's disappearance, given the circumstances of the crime." Investigators looking into cold cases in Modesto were hopeful that in the years since Susan vanished, more witnesses might feel compelled to come forward. In a 2022 statement, the police department stated that it was crucial to keep in mind that Susan was a young child living with a family. Regretfully, that family has not received justice or closure for 36 years. As an organization, it is our responsibility to help achieve some semblance of closure while ultimately working toward obtaining justice. The Modesto Police Department then declared the 76-year-old Raymond Lewis Stafford's arrest on Thursday, August 17, 2023. After residing in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas for over 5 years, Stafford was taken into custody on August 15th. For decades, Stafford seemed to be living in plain sight. On August 10th, detectives obtained an arrest warrant. Nevertheless, it wasn't until Tuesday that officers from the Texas Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department arrived at his residence and took him into custody. After being taken into custody without any problems, he was accused with killing Susan and placed in the Van Zandt County Jail. In the meantime, Stafford is being held in Texas as he awaits extradition to California. Modesto police have not provided any additional information regarding their understanding of what happened to Susan. It's unclear exactly how investigators narrowed in on Stafford as a potential suspect. Modesto police said they could not share any more information and are referring inquiries to the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office. In an attempt to find out what circumstances led to the suspect's arrest, newspapers and local radio stations contacted the Modesto Police Department and the Stanislaus County District Attorney. However, they did not receive a response. There was no information made public on Susan's actual cause of death, the possibility of finding her body, or the fresh evidence that led to Stafford's charges. The Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, the California Department of Justice, and many Texas authorities were thanked by Modesto police in a press release for their assistance during the protracted and difficult investigation. It stated that Susan Robin Bender's case has found conclusion thanks to the cooperative efforts of these agencies. Detectives had a suspect almost immediately after they began to anticipate foul play. A month after Susan disappeared, he was detained on suspicion of a separate burglary, and investigators at the time tracked down Stafford using the green van, according to court documents filed in Stanislaus County. At that time, his name had not been made public. During their inquiry, they discovered that Stafford had worked briefly with Patricia Bender, Susan's mother. She stated at the time that she thought Stafford might have become close to her daughter after contacting their home phone. According to court records, Pat briefly worked for Stafford's security company in 1985. They also stated on a few occasions that she acknowledged dating Stafford. Susan knew Stafford well as a result. The vehicle Susan had been spotted boarding at the bus stop was his rented van. Her friend, who was present at the bus stop on the day she vanished, said that she jumped into his van without hesitation. According to a former resident of Stafford's house in the 1980s, Stafford admitted to strangling a female with a string or wire and burying her close to the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite. According to court records that were obtained, he claimed to have driven to a campground close to Yosemite National Park's huge Oak Flat entrance and dug the grave. Stafford, who was 38 at the time, ran for Modesto City Council less than a year after Susan vanished. When the local newspaper inquired about his criminal history, he responded in July 1985 saying it was just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The charges against him included running an unregistered private investigation business and wearing a badge identifying him as a private investigator. According to Stafford, the main focus of his campaign was developing laws that would shield kids from predators. "We don't waste any time pursuing those who are bothering our kids," he continued. Unsurprisingly, he lost the election. Stafford admitted to filing a fraudulent police complaint and was found guilty of setting a business on fire 5 months later in December 1986. It has been stated that he staged a kidnapping in order to avoid going to court. He reappeared on law enforcement's radar in 1994. Under the alias Greg Tunningley, he was included to the offenders registry for the abuse of a 13-year-old girl in California. Stafford was revealed to be that man in new court documents. Pat said that ever since learning the two had maintained a covert relationship, she had always assumed Stafford was the reason for her daughter's abduction. Pat stated, I knew from the beginning when my daughter went missing. I've been aware that he was the one in charge. I was ignored by the investigators." Pat continued, saying that for the previous 37 years the idea had been a part of her. "It felt like I was lost," she went on. "To be honest, I felt like the walking dead woman. Hearing folks talk about their kids and grandchildren damaged my heart." Pat claimed that what kept her going was her recollections of her 15-year-old daughter. Susan, she recalled, was gregarious. She was hilarious. She was just a typical girl attempting to find her place in the world. Pat never lost hope. However, up until today, her search for her daughter had been excruciating. She mentioned that she had to rely on her faith. She said, "I'm grateful that the system has at last chosen to act, and not just leave me guessing is something I'm happy about." To give Susan the proper send-off they have always believed she deserves. Those closest to her hope to find out where she is. In the last act, her mother confesses that forgiveness for Stafford is the one thing she has never struggled with. "I have forgiven him for what he did to my kid. Even though I know this seems kinda crazy, since I wouldn't want to live my entire life carrying it with me, I really have." Pat claimed that her dark cloud has lifted as a result of her arrest. "I am no longer interested in seeing how the trial will proceed. All I want is to find my Susan's body. My message is a simple one," she said in closing. "Always pay attention to your children at any cost." An 18-year-old security guard in Sunnyvale was stabbed to death, and over 44 years later, the cold case murder suspect has been identified. Estella Elena Mena was employed in 1979 as a security guard in Sunnyvale for a company that was located at 444 DeGuigne Drive. When Sunnyvale police arrived at the scene of an alleged assault at the company on October 27th that year, they discovered Mena bleeding profusely from several stab wounds in the lobby. Using DNA from crime scene evidence uploaded into a national database, county investigators and Sunnyvale detectives, according to Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker, were able to conclusively identify Sam Silva of Colorado as the man who fatally stabbed Elena during a rape attempt at her place of employment in 1979. While serving a sentence for a firearms charge in a Colorado jail, Silva passed away in 2008. According to Baker, Silva and Mena were co-workers at Great America when they most likely first met. At the time of their fatal encounter, Silva and his victim were both 18 years old. An office worker had interrupted the attack, causing the culprit to flee. The identity of Mena's murderer remained a mystery until 2023, when the Santa Clara County Crime Lab conducted a new DNA study on blood found on her clothes and shoes in the 1979 evidence file. The blood samples collected at the crime scene enabled the DA's cold case unit to crack the case. According to Baker, when District Attorney Jeff Rosen founded the cold case team in 2011, the Estella murder was among the first cases the unit looked into. According to Baker, following the collection of around 30 different objects from the 1979 crime scene, the only DNA samples obtained were of the victims and an unidentified guise found from the blood on the doorframe. Although a profile of the suspect was created using the DNA from the blood samples put into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, in 2011, no match was discovered. Additionally, the lab collected a variety of hairs, and the California Department of Justice received samples of those hairs in 2015. According to Baker, these also produced no conclusive identification. The prosecution stated that it is not surprising that no profiles were obtained from the evidence analyzed in 2011, because at the time, reviewing amalgamated and deteriorated samples was significantly more difficult than it is now. Nevertheless, the detectives had a major break in 2022. The blood on the victim's clothing and the blood in the doorframe were matched by the cold case section using genealogy. After determining who the source was, we tried to use cutting-edge technology to analyze the victim's clothes and determine whether or not the profile fit the doorframe guy, according to Baker. A large portion of the victim's apparel was examined in 2011. Knowing that our instruments had improved, we analyzed many parts and products in 2023 that had not been evaluated before. Our lab created Silva's profile based on this exam in 2023, and it was successfully completed with CODIS. According to Baker, Silva had been visiting relatives in Santa Clara County when the murder occurred, and he later escaped back to Colorado. Silva's criminal record included manslaughter, attempted murder, rape, assault with a dangerous weapon, and offenses involving guns. Silva passed away in 2006, but not before his DNA was gathered and entered into the CODIS database. Before his death, DNA testing was not advanced enough to identify him. The DA's Office Cold Case section has successfully investigated 10 sexual assaults and 16 cold case homicides since 2018. Forensic genealogy helped solve 4 of those homicides. Sunnyvale Public Safety Detective Matthew Hutchison traveled to Colorado for several days to conduct follow-up interviews after we had the CODIS hit from the victim's clothing, according to Baker. After several months of conducting conventional research, which included speaking with witnesses, finally came to the official conclusion in September that Silva was the culprit. Mary Mathis Davis, 29, was last seen on May 30, 1987, at her place of employment, Lanier's Ace Hardware in Lexington, North Carolina. She worked for a little while, but didn't come back after lunch. Her body was discovered by detectives the following day on East Center Street, near a Winn-Dixie shop. She had been beaten and strangled. Richard Davis, Mary's husband, thought back to their last meeting. Richard stated, "I saw her that morning, and I went to my sister's swimming. When we got back, we assumed she would have already come home from work. From Mary's body, investigators were able to get DNA belonging to the offender. It was only lately that advances in DNA technology made DNA usable. Russell Grant Wood is identified by Othram Inc., using forensic evidence as the person who killed Mary." The news was released on February 3, 2023. 2013 saw the passing of Lexington resident Russell Wood. According to the police, he had no prior convictions. According to the investigators, Wood and Mary Davis were acquaintances but did not know one another well. Tracy Cleary, the daughter of Mary Davis, was a year old when her mother passed away. Cleary remarked, "I've always heard that she was sweet and kind and patient and just liked people." She expressed her relief at the department's finding. saying it clears her father's name and provides closure. According to Cleary, I think it was more relief that everything that I might have thought about, or what it could be throughout my life, was all proven. Authorities stated that although they are unsure of Wood's motivation, they are certain that he would face charges for killing Mary, kidnapping her, and abusing her if he were still alive. Terrie Ladwig, then 28 years old, was a Concord, California resident in 1994. She was wed to Stephen Ladwig, a Navy petty officer. Terrie was beaten and strangled on December 2, 1994, in the Adelaide Street apartment in Concord, where she and her husband lived. When Stephen Ladwig got back from his duty tour above the USS Parche submarine, he discovered Terrie's body. Stephen Ladwig was never considered a suspect in her death. The police at the time had not named any suspects. The apartment was searched for forensic evidence. There was no indication of forced entry, which was the only other lead investigators had. This could indicate that Terrie was acquainted with her assailant. After the investigators failed to identify a culprit, the case went cold. Until 55 years old, James Grimsley was detained in Salt Lake City, Utah, on January 27, 2023, on the accusations of killing Terrie Ladwig. When Grimsley was arrested, he was working as a truck driver in Salt Lake City. He was originally from Oregon. Lieutenant Sean Donnelly of the Concord Police said, "We are not certain of the motive. We can assume that the victim allowed him into the flat because there was no indication of a forced entry. I can attest that it was a graphic scene, appearing to be a struggle between Terrie and the suspect. Many interviews were done during the initial inquiry, and forensic evidence was taken from the scene, according to Donnelly. Nevertheless, we won't reveal the precise connection at this time. After the arraignment, we or the district attorney's office may provide that information." Grimsley was taken into jail in Salt Lake County on a $1 million warrant and was subsequently extradited to Contra Costa County. A friend of Terrie's, following the release of information about the arrest, Brittany Shorris said what she thought. "She was an amazing lady. She had a great personality. She made people laugh. She would brighten my day whenever she came in." A 13-year-old girl in Charlotte, North Carolina, reported to the police on August 13, 2014, that she had been beaten by an unidentified guy. The incident happened close to Eastway Drive on Shamrock Drive. She was brought to a local hospital where assault evidence was gathered. Over the years, detectives would frequently attempt to match the perpetrator's DNA to a database-based DNA profile. The man who attacked the 13-year-old girl was recently identified as 33-year-old Travon Levi Woods by detectives with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Through DNA matching in the combined DNA index system, the identity was established. For this offense, Woods was taken into custody on October 27, 2023. Woods was being released from the Alexander Correctional Institute in Taylorsville on the precise day of his arrest, having served his entire sentence for unrelated offenses. The Mecklenburg County Detention Center is where the police allegedly transported Woods to serve him with his fresh warrants. The date of the trial has not yet been set. Marlene Warren and her son Joe Aarons were having breakfast on May 26, 1990. When he claims that a clown with 2 balloons and a basket of flowers approached their front door. Aarons recalls his mother opening the door and taking the gifts with immense happiness. "I did not expected what she said at the time would turn out to be her final words." According to the police, the clown shot Warren in the head in a matter of seconds, taking her life and sparking a decades-long investigation for the truth. Dave Ehrenberg, the state attorney for Palm Beach County, stated that Marlene Warren had no known opponents. This was a murderous attempt. This violent crime was not committed at random. Immediately after Marlene Warren's shooting, investigators tried to figure out who could possibly want the mother and small business owner dead. they soon turned their attention to Michael Warren, her spouse, and Aaron's stepfather. There was a legitimate explanation, according to what Aaron's mother had informed him. "If something were to happen to me," she added, "it will be your father's fault. Aaron." I said, "No way. He would never act in such a way." "Don't put anything past him," she said. Soon after, investigators discovered a potential motive. At the automotive company he owned, Michael Warren seemed to be having an affair with Sheila Keene, a co-worker there who handled repossessed vehicles. The culprits were identified within hours of Marlene Warren's death. According to Dave Ehrenberg, both Michael Warren and Sheila Keene were involved, but there was an alibi for Michael Warren. Michael Warren was ruled out as the gunman after authorities established that he was traveling to a horse racing in a car with friends when Marlene was shot. Keene was unable to pinpoint her precise position when questioned by investigators about her whereabouts, although she did say that she was looking for cars to repossess. Investigators also discovered that a lady who matched Keene's description was seen purchasing a clown costume in addition to the balloons and flowers the clown had left before the murder. When investigators discovered a car that matched Aaron's description of the attacker's getaway car, they claimed to have discovered brown hair that was physically similar to Keene's hair. Investigators claim orange fibers found in Keene's apartment and inside the automobile matched the clown's wig's description. Ehrenberg stated that Sheila Keene Warren had the opportunity, the motivation, and the resources to carry out this action. Ehrenberg, who rose to the position of Palm Beach County State Attorney in 2012, claims that prosecutors at the time did not think they had enough evidence to charge Keene with Marlene Warren's murder, despite the circumstantial case building against her. Furthermore, the case became stale as time went on without any fresh evidence. "For a long time, I was in pain and hopelessness," said Aaron. Finally, there was some movement in the case by 2017. After re-examining historical data, a cold case section discovered that Keene's DNA matched the hair recovered in the possible getaway car. Upon initiating their search for Keene, the authorities discovered that she had reconnected with her former romantic partner, Michael Warren. 12 years after the murder, in 2002, the pair tied the knot. Ehrenberg stated, "This is a man who recently got married to the main suspect after his wife was murdered." Combining the two of them, having an affair with their subsequent marriage, made it seem as though their mission had been successfully completed. For a number of years, the Warren family operated Purple Cow, a hamburger restaurant in Kingsport, Tennessee. Rumors circulated among former restaurant staff members that Keene Warren had shot Michael Warren's ex-wife and that she had done it while wearing a clown costume. According to an employee interviewed by detectives, Warren was focused on dressing up as a clown for Halloween one year at the restaurant. She even sent authorities a photo of her appearing in clown makeup. On September 26, 2017, Sheila Keene Warren was taken into custody for the murder of Marlene Warren, 27 years after the shooting. When Ehrenberg talks about the arrest, he argues that she probably never dreamed in a million years that she would be held accountable for her misdeeds. She believed she had gotten away with it. In addition to asserting that Keene Warren is innocent, her defense lawyer, Greg Rosenfeld, claims that the prosecution's careless attempt to wrap up a well-known cold case led to her detention. Rosenfeld said, "The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office did such a poor job investigating this case that we will never know who actually killed Marlene Warren. Without a doubt, I can tell you that Sheila Keene was not involved. In exchange for a plea deal that will probably see her released from prison in no more than 2 years, Sheila Keene Warren, 59, entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder. Keene Warren has been detained since 2017 while she awaits trial for first-degree murder. Keene Warren has maintained that she is not the murderer, even after Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office stated that advances in DNA technology demonstrate that a hair recovered in the clown's getaway car originated from her." Although Keen Warren has already spent 6 years in detention pending trial, the agreement stipulates a 12-year sentence. Also, Rosenfeld anticipates that she would be released early in the next year because a 1990 Florida law permitted substantial time off for good behavior. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of unsolved cases.